just want to say a few things before we dive completely in. I handpicked each of these panelists because of not only what they bring with their writing, which is fantastic, but also what they accomplish in the community and what I think they can bring to this discussion. I mean, as you can see, it's a diverse panel, and we want to talk about a lot of different things under the umbrella of race, immigration, and things like that. So I really appreciate, I know this isn't like the most glamorous way for you to promote your books, so I appreciate you coming and doing it. And you came from the city and the South Bay, and we appreciate that. And then for the audience, I really appreciate your participation. With the way the weather was going all this week, I was like, oh my God, no one's coming, it's raining, Californians and rain, it just doesn't, it's not gonna happen. Then we had a beautiful dry day today, and I was so happy about it, and then someone said, yeah, but you never know, it could work against you. It's like, I give up. I just, whatever's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. We've got great panelists coming, and we're gonna have a great conversation. So we are going to leave enough time for your questions and your comments, and I think it's important to say when we get to that part that we want this to feel like this is a safe place for all your questions, all your opinions, and nobody's wrong, and we're all going to be supportive and listen. And with that, let's dive in. My first question is, for the past 2 years and change, we've been under the Trump presidency, and as we all know, it's been fraught with a lot of controversy, not least of which are the things to do with race and racism. We could start off with like Charlottesville, the Charlottesville protest and how that went very, very wrong, and his defending of neo-Nazis. And then we've had the kind of embellishing what's going on at the border and trying to keep immigration down and making it be a bigger problem than it actually is. And that's kind of a very hot button topic, understandably. And then even more recently, in Virginia, we've got 3 elected officials there that have just come under fire for it being dug up in their past wearing blackface, and then also their reaction to it or lack thereof. So obviously we got a lot going on in our country right now, and I'd just like to pass it off to each of you. Given what the climate has been and what it is currently, how do you think that leaves us as not only Californians, but in the country as far as this topic of race, ethnicity and racism, immigration? How do you feel where we are right now? And I'm going to start off with you, Brian.
It's interesting because while I was talking backstage, we've got this show that Charlie Barron and I are doing. It's an accidental show just about living under these times, and it's not on? Closer? Okay. Good? I'm sorry. Well, we've got this accidental stage play that we started. I said accidental because it was just some pieces we were writing on what it's like living in these unusual times. And I tell the story about the day after the election, how it just felt like things were different. For some reason, I just couldn't put my head on what felt different. And I'm driving I live in San Leandro, I'm driving out 580 to the Bay Bridge, and I get to the approach for the Bay Bridge, and I'm in a 68 Mustang that doesn't have a passenger side, you can't see a passenger side mirror. There isn't one, factory. So I don't know there's a car in my blind spot until I hear a horn honk. And I move out of the way, and this car pulls up beside me. It's a Prius, and there's a middle-aged white guy with a baseball cap, and he yells the N-word out the window at me. And first thing I thought was, I was just called the N-word by a guy driving a Prius. He's a racist and an environmentalist. For being green, just not black. And I thought about how I had not been called that word. You know, as I write my book, I grew up in you know, in an all-white community with adults driving down the street yelling that word out the window. I mean, that's 70s and 80s and stuff. But it's been years since somebody's actually called me that. But what felt different, I realized, was that the day after Trump's elected, it's almost like this guy felt like he had permission. And that's it. The people are saying things they think, no, it's okay for them to say all of the horrible racist things that they had thought or kept in the back of their minds, or at least as dumb as they weren't stupid enough to say it out loud because of what the repercussions could be. Now they feel that they've got an ally in the White House and they can say what they want. And that's the part that is scary. That and the other part being that America has lost her empathy. I believe that we're in a place where America has lost her empathy. Her empathy, I'm sorry. It's not as empathetic as a nation as she has historically been.
Yeah, no, good point.
Julie?
It's hard to follow a comedian. I agree, of course, with everything Brian said. I think for me, I'm super clear that we happen to be living through a moment. That the historians will write about these years, and with the benefit of distance and time and hindsight, they will try to make some sense of it. We have the misfortune, or maybe it is good fortune, to be living through it. So we can't quite make sense of what is happening. But I think we're all pretty clear that this is a moment. And in a moment like this, action is required. There is so much being thrown at us. There is so much that is bewildering. You know, to see children being ripped from the arms of their parents and lost track of is in and of itself a humanitarian crisis that will be written about 30 and 50 years hence. And that is just one piece of news in America, alongside 10 other pieces of news that are equally devastating for completely different reasons. And so we are in this moment where we are becoming increasingly brown as a society. We know California is now majority non-white. We know America will be majority non-white by 2040. I keep fantasizing about getting 2040 tattooed on me somewhere. It's coming, you know, but I don't want like the racist Prius guy to take that as, you know, an affront and decide to kill me. And so we're increasingly browning. We're increasingly becoming a nation that is incredibly diverse and where nobody is a majority, which I will welcome. And yet we have this vitriol and hatred and aggression that has indeed been given permission to come out from under the rock under which it's been hiding. I'm not sure I agree that America has lost its empathy. I think what I have felt is this doubt as to whether America ever had empathy. And I mean, Americans have had empathy, but when we talk about America and the ideal of equal, you know, liberty and justice for all, and all people were, all men are created equal, we know, of course, that that was never true. That was never what they intended. They who wrote that intended that they would be equal amongst themselves, but that the rest of us, in my case, for example, were 3/5 of the human, and so on. So I think we are reckoning with what it means to be America and what it means to be an American. And so in this moment, we have this horrendous, necessary task of speaking out and speaking up and calling it out and envisioning the America we want to see become herself and being part of getting us there.
You're both very hard to follow. That was really beautiful. I think that I completely agree that we're in a moment, and I feel as though we're in a moment in which, and this has to always have been true, but it seems so much more visible now. I think that if one is not actively trying to be part of the solution, one is then actively part of the problem. And so I don't think it's enough for people to say, well, I'm not racist. I'm definitely not part of the problem. That's not enough. One has to be anti-racist. I think about this in terms of, well, maybe this is, I'll just tell an encouraging story. I teach at the University of San Francisco, and at some point I was talking about so I don't engage, like I don't watch all that many movies, for instance, and so I often feel very out of the loop in terms of what people are talking about, so I feel very proud of myself when I can tell a story, or like I can like bring up like popular culture, and like, I was like, hey y'all, like I can talk about this TV show, so I brought up Girls, the TV show, and I was like, you know, and I was looking around like, hey, we can all, and everyone looked blankly at me, and I was just like, wait, do you all not watch Girls? And this was when it was still live, so it was just like 2 years ago, and And one woman raised her hand, and she was, she was 20 years old, and she was like, look, girls is just too white. It's just full of white people. I'm not interested in watching this. She herself was, and she was like, I'm white, and she was like, I mean, I'm Jewish, and like, but I'm still white. And I think that the people in the show, they think that because they're Jewish, that makes it okay for the show to be all white. And she was like, my friends and I just aren't interested in that. And I was just like, that's amazing, because my friends definitely complain about the show being too white, but a lot of my friends still watch the show, and they were just opting out entirely, and that made me so happy. So that's where I'll stop for now.
I came as an immigrant to the U.S. in 2002, and I think I've always been like learning what America is or what American ideals are, and when I first got here, I got kind of like that encouraging story, like we just want we want diversity, we want you. I kept, people kept telling me like people would say like someone really said to me like you are the American dream, which made me feel weird because didn't know what that meant. At the time I wasn't planning on staying here. I was just trying to go to school here. But then I think the many years that I've spent, the more complicated that idea has become. And when I became a citizen last year in February, thank you. And I was at the ceremony, and it was this. It had just been MLK Day over the weekend, and so it. They showed the I Have a Dream speech, and then during when you take your oath, and then there's a pre-recorded message that Donald Trump gives, welcoming the new Americans. And later I went and I watched Obama's speech, and the difference was in the way that Donald Trump would be saying like, okay, now you've become an American. It is your responsibility to defend our ideals. Whereas Obama's welcome speech was more like, you are now part of America. Like we welcome your tradition. So it was just like a very different thing. But then after we took our oaths and we sat down, my phone buzzed and I looked at it. And there was like a news notification, and it was, Donald Trump has called these many countries like shithole countries. And so that was all in the same moment, right? So MLK, like shithole countries, and then we're all just new people who are like swearing in and taking the oath. So that is America right now.
Because that's what it's been like for like the last couple of years, where so much is going on in just a day, a week, that it's hard to almost process everything. That's amazing, all your stories. I'm going to start off next with you, Julie, because as Bill mentioned in the introduction, Julie's memoir is called Real American, and it is fantastic. I devoured it. It's recently in paperback. I encourage you to buy all our panelists' book, but yeah, I'm just pointing that out now because I'm going to your question, because in it, you talk about microaggressions. And I think because that could be more prevalent and more kind of covert than the other things we see dealing with racism, that I think it's important to tell us what that is exactly and maybe an example of what you've actually experienced.
Sure. So I don't want to presume that people in the audience don't know what a microaggression is. Some of you are, no doubt, have experienced them, are experiencing them. I'm a 51-year-old black and biracial woman. My father's an African-American male. My mother is a white British woman. And they raised me in mostly white spaces. Brian and I have that in common. And so microaggressions are, the old adage, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can never hurt you. That's what we were often told as children. And I think microaggressions are those tiny little things that aren't supposed to hurt you, but in the aggregate can really distort your sense of self. That is certainly what happened to me. Starting at a very young age, I got the message from the eyes of strangers on the street that something was wrong with my black daddy. I could see the hatred, not of all strangers, but of some, and it frightened me as a child of 3 or 4. And my white mother was never looked at that way. And of course it could have to do with gender as well, but over time you start to discern that look, that racist sneer, and it's a frightening thing. I remember the first time I saw the KKK on TV, you know, grown-up people with those hoods, but then small children with those hoods, and I felt terrified. And that terror came back when Charlottesville happened. Even though I was a 49-year-old woman, I felt like a 5-year-old child, just terribly frightened that white supremacists were marching really openly in the streets. So a microaggression is, it's like, I was telling the story to the kids from Branson and the faculty from Branson who were here, as was alluded to earlier. You know, when I would go to my best, so I'm in an all-white high school in Wisconsin, 1,200 kids, 2 Jewish families, and us. Everyone else is white and Lutheran for the most part. And you know, something seemingly innocent. I'm walking down the cement at a public pool in August, and a lady walks past me and stops, and then comes to me and says, "Oh my gosh, you're so tan!" Now, that wasn't offensive, but it was certainly a way for me to realize she has nothing in her conception of humans that says I'm anything but tan. So that's on the very, very benign side, but certainly begins to otherize me. Like, you're so tan. No, I'm actually, I am darker than usual because it's August and I'm African American. My best friend Diana, watching Gone with the Wind, you know, she loved those black and white movies about the South and about the olden days, and she would say to me, "Don't you wish we could live back then?" And you laugh, but she was dead serious. And I said, "No." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I would have been a slave." And she said, "Oh, but I mean if you weren't black." And I said, "But I am black." And then, here's the kicker. "Oh, I don't think of you as black. I think of you as normal." So that's that, right? So she thinks she's complimenting me. You're not like those black people. You're normal. You're like me. You're like us. You're like white. And it's an example of how, you know, over time you get messages about your own self heaped upon you by the narrative embedded with racism, that something's wrong with you, or you're an example of what's right about your race, not wrong about your race. Any one of us who's a member of a group about which negative stereotypes are held can come to feel the weight of those stereotypes. There's a field of psychology now, in social psychology, a concept called stereotype threat, which Claude Steele at Stanford really labeled and discovered and has pioneered our understanding of. And stereotype threat is that weight of those stereotypes and how they can make us believe them. We can come to believe the negative stereotypes about our group, and microaggressions in the aggregate can do that. And so, you know, it's the coworker when I'm a dean at Stanford who's so enchanted by the corkscrews in my hair that she stops in the middle of a meeting and turns to me and starts playing with my hair and tossing it around like it's a beach ball, or petting me like I'm an animal in a petting zoo. And I have to hold my shit together because I know if I react the way I want to react, what's going to happen? I'm going to be called the overreacting angry black woman, which is exactly what happened. But I was in the act then of reclaiming myself and my right to stand up for myself in the face of these things. Finally starting to call out microaggressions in my 30s, which felt, you know, although there's consequence for standing up, it is very liberating to do so.
Well, liberating, and probably in the long run you're helping out those people because you're kind of teaching them too. I mean, instead of just accepting it, internalizing it, I mean, depending on how you're reacting to it, it could be a teachable moment, as they say. Do you agree with that?
It could be a teachable moment, and yet, in that sense, our lives are then full of teachable moments, and it can be quite a burden to, you know, to sort of take that on. Am I going to take on the obligation to make this a teachable moment, or am I going to walk away? Am I going to walk away with my head held high, my dignity intact? Am I going to lose my mind? You know, am I going to somehow be called the one who's overreacted, and then I have to apologize because I have now fit the stereotype they have of an emotional black woman? And so, you know, we'd really love for folks to learn these things on their own without having to be the teacher.
Brian, I feel like you're in this unique position because personally, you have such a great sense of humor, but it's actually your profession, and you interject it into your work as a writer and a performer. At the same time, you represent a group, black men, that some would say sometimes take on the brunt of a large piece of racism in our country, and certainly a big spotlight has been put on it, recently. How do you find a way to balance such serious topics and things that I'm sure you've experienced, as you just told us, but also bring the balance with some interjecting humor?
Well, like most, I don't think I hear it. Let me borrow that one. I think this one's broken. So mistitle my book and I get the broken mic. What's going on here at Book Bill, where's Bill?
Bill, like the bill.
Like most comics, we do what we do because there are things in our past or things that we grew up with that are just very hurtful, very painful. We laugh. I know personally I laugh so I don't cry. I mean, that's where it started, is I laugh so I grew up exactly like you did. And I'm listening to you tell these stories and I'm shaking my head. You ever hear this one? You are so articulate.
Oh, yeah.
You are so well spoken. And it's like, really? So I walk up to you and say, let me ask you something. I mean, would that make you feel... but yeah, it's exactly, you grow up thinking, and the microaggressions is death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's what it is. It's death by, and I'm with you too. It's not my responsibility to teach you not to be ignorant. Why is that my responsibility? But in terms of balance, when I made the shift from just doing stand-up, which was just about jokes, to doing solo plays so that I could actually really talk about serious issues and not have to worry about the laugh, I think that was kind of the switch for me, because it enabled me to get a lot of things off my chest that I hadn't been able to get off of my chest before. And what the comedy does is keeps it from being a diatribe. Really, is what the comedy is. It's the spoonful of sugar, so to speak. But there are so many of these things, and I'm thinking again as you talk, as you're bringing so many things up, but just things you wouldn't think of. One of the most, I take an acting class in the city on Mondays, and one of the assignments I got was to come in and talk about a time I was really angry about something, but I held my tongue. And the improv is, well, here's what give us the situation, and then say what you wish you had said at the time. All right, so my situation, one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I had just been off Broadway with Not a Genuine Black Man to Play. The book had come out while I was in New York. I come back, my book's everywhere, it's on the Chronicle bestseller list. I go into Dublin, I'll say where it was Barnes & Noble in Dublin. And I signed some copies, and I'm looking for a graphic novel. And I ask the clerk if he'll help me. If he has it, he goes, "Come on, we'll look." So we're down looking through the graphic novels, trying to find it. And this girl walks over. She's a white girl, about 14. Tank top. She's got a tank top that says in sparkly cursive, "porn star" across it. 14 years old, approximately. So she asks the clerks, "Can you tell me where the ladies' room is?" He says, "Yeah, it's down there to the right." Okay, so she goes, and then he finds that he's looking for the book still, and I go, "You know what, I need to go too. Where's the man?" She goes, "Oh, to the left." Okay, so I get up, I go to the left, I go to the restroom, I come back out, he gives me the book. Hey, I found it great. So I have it, I'm browsing, and this woman walks up to me behind me and says, excuse me. I go, "Yes." She goes, "My daughter was really afraid that you followed her into the bathroom." Oh. And I said, "Excuse me?" He goes, "My daughter said that the black man followed her and it terrified her, and you followed her to the bathroom." I said, "Ma'am, I didn't go. She went ahead of me and went to the right. I went to the left. I never saw her again after." And it turns into this woman in the store. Now again, I've got a best-selling book in the store. I've just autographed copies in the store, and this woman is standing there yelling at me and accusing me of all of these things. And I just so wanted to just let loose, but I couldn't. Because if I do that, then I'm the angry black man and I'm every horrible stereotype. So I just, and the thing that I kick myself for now, all these years later, is for even showing her the respect to call her ma'am. But I did, and I held my tongue, and I wish that I hadn't. I really, really wish, I'm not here. I really, really wish that I hadn't held my tongue. But if I had, I know that I'd be sitting here regretting that I'd said what was on my mind. It's a no-win situation. So it's hard, but that's where the humor has to come from. Because I cried otherwise.
But then you're saying you can use it later for material.
I'm saying there's a great quote that I love, and that is, "Today's pain is tomorrow's masterpiece."
Great. And Reese, in addition to Reese and Ingrid both being debut novelists, they both write a lot of articles for different magazines and newspapers. And one of my favorites of Reese's is that you wrote a fantastic article in New York Magazine. And it deals with your personal experience of racism as a Korean American. The title of the article is "Why I Don't Leave the House Without Putting on Black Eyeshadow." And you told me to read the excerpt that I was really stood out to me, so I'm going to read it. It's not possible, I suppose, to talk about how I elect to look without mentioning racism. I inhabit the body of an Asian woman, which means I'm also, at times, particularly likely to be thought of as submissive and willing to please. I'm just trying to be polite, to be kind, but here I am, smiling and receptive, and what this can mean is that I get underestimated. People often assume I'm harmless, someone who will let them get away with unacceptable behavior, and what I hope to convey a little, even if it's just with a centimeter of extra makeup, is that I'm not, I won't. That's me quoting her. Explain that, because obviously we can't read the whole article, although it's fantastic, but just kind of give us more about that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that. So I wrote this piece. It was in New York Magazine because somebody asked me just to write a piece about, the editor asked, "Why do you wear so much black eye makeup? Can you just write about it?" And so I said, okay, sure. And I thought more about it, and I did have all these reasons for it. And it was that when I started doing this, I was in a period of my life when I was feeling very down about, well, I worked on my novel for 10 years, and this was around the 7-8 year mark, and I was just feeling kind of really low about myself and about my book, and I was like, what am I doing with my life? I should have become a dermatologist, like these were all these questions and then, but I think I generally do tend to read as being like a happy person, and like, I'm not, I mean who is, but, but like then I especially wasn't, and so I just was like, okay, you know what, like I'm gonna do something about this. I started wearing more eye makeup, and it helped. Like people would ask, like, what's going on with your eye makeup? And some people said it made me look like a superhero was a comment I got. Someone else said that it made me look like a character from Blade Runner, which I was into. Like all of it, I was like, okay, I'll just keep doing this for a while. But I think there is like a lot of what you're saying about the stereotypes people have. It's so exhausting to move through the world and to realize that someone's viewing you through the lens of a stereotype, and then to decide whether or not you're going to respond to it, how you're going to respond to it, how you're going to regret what you're going to say afterward, and then how you're just going to spend years maybe wishing that you'd said something, even while knowing that whatever you said was probably not going to help anyway. Just recently, there was a big uproar online about, I haven't even really watched the show yet, but Marie Kondo, there was a big uproar, and a lot of people were having a lot of trouble with her show, and using very racist terms to talk about how they had problems with her. Somebody said something, this is a direct quotation, someone said something like, I don't want Tinkerbell telling me what to do. And there were words about how cute she was, about how tiny she was, and I think they didn't, either they were aware of how racist this felt, or they were, and it still seemed okay, because I think in a lot of ways, as an Asian American, I do feel there is a lot of privilege that comes with being Asian American. Being Asian American, it does also seem to mean that it's still kind of okay for people think it's okay to make fun of us. People think it's okay to wear yellowface in Hollywood. Until like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, there were big movies that had white people being cast as Asian characters. And so, it means that often I feel as though I'm performing a toughness and performing an energy that I don't necessarily feel, but I want to do it because I want to combat the stereotype of docility, of quietness. And then at the end of the day, I just end up exhausted more than anything. Like in response to the Marie Kondo situation, I tweeted something like, I think I tweeted something like, unrelated to anything, can people please stop talking about Asian American using the words adorable and cute, which is something I've been called often in a professional setting. At bookstore readings, people have told me how adorable I am, and I'm just like, I am sitting here, I wrote a book, I'm a grown person, please don't call me adorable. But I think people don't realize how, a lot of people still haven't learned that can be a problem. So I tweeted about that and I said, please don't call us adorable and cute. And then I went into all caps, and I was trying to be funny, I think, too. I went into all caps and I said, we are not kittens, we will fuck you up.
We say that, then they're frightened that we're coming
Right,
in.
exactly, and so it's just exhausting in the end.
And Ingrid, since you're recently American citizen, I mean, I think maybe you could really speak to what's going on with some of the really potent immigration issues. We're looking at what in the next few days, the deadline again, where the government might be shut down, where we're going to have to talk about the wall again, and talk about exhausting. But it just, I mean, and I know you deal with children, immigrant children, with an organization in the city, which you can certainly talk about. But if you could kind of speak to that, how they're feeling, the best way for us to respond or be supportive, or to kind of grapple with all that's going on.
Well, it's been one thing to realize is that it has been going on for a while. I think since the way that we've been, the allowances that we have for who can seek asylum has just been narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. And I think it was after 9/11 that it started to change. And the first thing that kind of changed was, and this is always kind of the way that these things happen, is like a very subtle thing, where there were a lot of people who were coming from South America fleeing violence, but they kind of put some language in there that if you had given some unsubstantiated support to a terrorist organization, you couldn't apply for asylum. But a lot of people's situations were that maybe you were threatened by either like a paramilitary group or a guerrilla group, and they told you like, feed us or we will, kill your family. So if you give them food, then that would be considered support. And so then you're not allowed to apply for asylum. So then that started to change, and we haven't done, I wasn't an American then, so you didn't do the homework of looking at what that was doing. And there's a lot of, I think a lot about the language that we're using. One tangible thing that I would like to see change is just even the way that we call immigrants. Like in the law books, we say that they're aliens. And so minors who are seeking asylum at the border, we call them unaccompanied aliens. So even that, I think, starts kind of a wheel of violence that we could just even be more thoughtful about. So I do work with immigrant high school students, and I got a grant from the city of San Francisco to teach them creative writing. So I work with them like 6 hours a week, and we write stories and poems. There's a lot of tension, and there's a lot of trauma in the air. But they also give me hope. Like they're so resilient and so just already have a lot of energy to kind of like seek a new life.
Optimism.
Yeah, they have a lot of optimism. And so, it's wonderful to see, but I do wish that we were doing more for them.
Okay, yeah. And I'm sure people are gonna have questions about, like, maybe very practically and specifically how we can help. Before I turn it over to the audience, I just want my part to end a little positive at least, and say, we did in November have a blue wave, which I think a lot of us here felt was a good thing, and we're very relieved. And now we have a very diverse Congress, the most that's ever been, and that's wonderful. Do you see that there are things that we can feel optimistic about and positive? I think the fact that we're even having events like this and having a dialogue could be perceived as positive and taking healthy steps forward. Would any of you like to speak to that?
Well, I'm going to say this correctly. We don't have a diverse Congress. We have a diverse House.
Right.
You know, the Senate is still it's still a good old boys club.
Yeah.
But here's what's optimistic. There are a lot of people who became engaged and involved in the last election who would never have thought of getting off the couch and becoming engaged and involved. So I think that that's the positive thing. Is basically what happened in 2016 has awakened the sleeping giant.
Yeah.
You don't have to go in order, do I?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I am heartened by the fact that there are so many narratives that are being published between the pages of a book, put on the large screen, put on the small screen, put on podcasts, that are the stories of non-white America. It has been the case for hundreds upon hundreds of years that white was the norm, and the rest of us were sort of interlopers or aliens or what have you, undeserving of America's bounty and rights and so on. But ours is a time of rich content about the experience of white folks. That won't end, but in addition to white folks, we've got people of color being represented in all kinds of mediums, and so I'm really heartened by that. I'm heartened by the success of movies that depict an experience that isn't predominantly the white experience. It shows us that there is this sort of inevitable evolution toward all of us mattering, as opposed to only one set of us mattering. So I'm heartened by that. And I love, for example, going to Crazy Rich Asians with a group of women who were, 3/4 of whom were Asian, and watching my friends cry. Just at being in a cinema, watching a lighthearted rom-com with Asian folks and feeling like we're not relegated to that one stereotypical character in the corner. We're just getting to be ourselves in whatever way we like, and they cried. And one of them turned to me and said, this is our Cosby Show. For me, the Cosby Show in the 80s was a middle-class black family with a black dad as a physician. Well, that's what my dad was. The first time I saw on the TV screen, a family that kind of looked like mine. And so it sort of started to make me feel kind of normal. So I loved that was happening. And I love that Black Panther has done as well as it has. And I love, there are so many examples. Ava DuVernay's work, Shonda Rhimes' work. There's just so much out there for your consumption if you're interested. If you're interested in learning about the experience of people not like you, and I say that to all of us, the material is now there.
I think I also cried while watching Crazy Rich Asians, and I was trying not to because of all this eyeliner. Not prepared. I read this study once, or I read like a fraction. I read a snippet of the study, and it said that back when Will and Grace was on the air, that anyone who had watched Will and Grace so much as once, that they tended to be significantly less homophobic than people who had never encountered Will and Grace.
Wow.
And back then, I think it was like the only big show that was prominently centered on gay characters. And so that I do find it to be heartening that there are more stories being told. I remember the day after the elections when I was at an artist residency in upstate New York. I'd gotten there 2 days before then, so that was its own kind of strange. We watched the elections, everyone cried. At the dinner table the next day, I was just crying all through dinner. People were very upset, of course. But I turned to someone who was sitting next to me, and he was in his 60s or 70s. So I asked, you were here when Reagan was elected. What was that like? Like, how did you all get through that sorrow? Because right now, I think everyone I know feels like, how do we even go on from this? And he said that, well, the thing about the Reagan election is, he said, the first one, it mobilized a generation of us. Like, we had been people who had not been political. He said, I was in college at the time, and everyone I knew became political. And I think that very much has happened. I don't really know writers, for instance, who would call themselves not political, or who would say, I'm not engaged in politics. And I think even 5 years ago, there were writers who would say, oh, I don't write political things, like what I write isn't political. And I think now that's just not a statement that anyone can responsibly make, and that has a lot of significance.
I would echo what you're saying, Reese. That's given me a lot of hope just to see how there's more of an intersectional conversation going on, where it's politics when it comes to like gender and race, and even like immigration status. Even when talking about books, or even when like you're just interested in music and you talk about like how these things meet there. So that, I think that's something that gives me hope. But I do go back and forth where I don't feel like we're headed in a good direction, maybe. Like I do like sometimes wake up and I feel like, okay, like this could actually spiral down and be like a very terrible situation. So I do want to say, like, I go back and forth.
Cautiously optimistic. Maybe. Well, if you're in the back, if you wouldn't mind, and I'm going to pick you first to be a fabulous example of standing up and speaking loudly. But if I need to, I'll repeat the question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was so good. And so needed. I grew up in a family that had a lot of awareness about both race and class. And it's still only in the last 5 years that I feel like I've really become aware of, as a white person, how much privilege I actually have, and how much that means I never ever have to even think about. Sometimes my white friends make comments that I'm just like astounded by. And it's from lack of awareness and lack of ignorance, and I do not know how to respond. Like, I'm often kind of shocked. Any suggestions?
Basically, you're saying you're shocked sometimes by what your white friends may say that's inappropriate. Am I right?
That's just an absence of awareness.
Right.
And speaks to their absence of awareness about what privilege actually is.
Their absence of awareness of what privilege is, and you don't know exactly the best way to respond.
I'm going to pass on some advice I got an hour ago from the students at Branson that I was talking to in the other building. One of the students there, Bella, offered a great example of what to do. She said the best thing to, and Bella had self-identified as half Asian, half white. She said the best thing to do so that you don't shut people down is to try to meet them where they are. So to say to them quite literally, I'm not understanding what you mean by that comment. Can you tell me more? Now, it requires a bit of a leap of faith, because you really understand what they meant by that. What I'm trying to say is, like, you're actually coming from this place of curiosity, instead of trying to bash them over the head, which will shut them down, and maybe you'll be ostracized from your group, to actually take that curious questioning, like, if it's a joke, if it's a statement, just to inquire further into it. And presumably then, when they're kind of explaining, maybe they come to see, like, maybe that wasn't so great. Or that's when you can say, well, actually, I really disagree with that, and I find that offensive. I was I go around the country talking about my books. I'm in some city, I can't even remember, the other day, and the driver who's taking me back to the airport starts to tell me that he just doesn't like this whole transgendered pronouns thing. And he and I don't know where that came from out of left field, and I sat there for 5 minutes going, do I say something? Do I say something? Do I say something? What do I say? And then finally I took a deep breath and I said, to that point you made about transgendered and pronouns, I said, I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I've come to understand from people who are trans that the pronouns are really cumbersome and problematic, and we make so many assumptions. I just took it on. And my little heart was just fluttering slightly, not that much, you know, because in the grand scheme of things, I was not at risk. But I'm not trans, you know, but I decided in that moment to be an ally for trans people who wouldn't have had the power that I had in that circumstance, whose hearts would have been fluttering a whole lot more than mine was. And I just decided to go for it. You know, you get to a certain age when you're like, what the hell? I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna take this on. And I did it in a way that I thought would that I thought would lead to further conversation. And it kind of did. And I don't know that I changed his mind, but I think by choosing to just say something, I was able to show him that not everyone agrees with you, and there is a different perspective, and I felt good about trying to share what my perspective was.
Good answer. Right up front, you know, since you're so close, you're going to get the mic. Come on.
Oh, thank you. What a wonderful discussion. The basic theme of race is in the context of prejudice and hate, which engenders hatred, fear. Are we on?
There we go.
Okay. So, but what's occurring to me is that the real prejudice in America, speaking just of America, is not just related to race. It's now been promoted to a prejudice against people's religion, namely Muslims, to be afraid, to hate, to have anxiety over any Muslims. It's also related not only to religion, but to politics. We notice that Trump has started bringing in the word socialism. The Democrats are going socialist. So he's creating a prejudice mentality to fear and hate and be leery of socialism in America. So now we have prejudice not only against race, racial identity, but politics and religion. So I would like you to process the broader range of prejudice with all the context, not just of race, but also of politics and religion and gender, which you touched upon. Thank you.
As if I didn't make the topic broad enough. Race in America. Anybody?
Different topic.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a different
I would
issue.
say it's a different
It's
topic,
broad,
it's
yeah.
definitely a broader issue, but humans have always, you know, since we were in caves, we were searching for a them to create an us. So we have an us them nature built into us, as any anthropologist would tell us, and it seems to be at the core of our ailment right now. But I'm one of these people who's confident. We've sent machines to Mars, we've decoded the genome. Why the hell can't we stop hating each other on the basis of difference?
I want to be fair. I promise I'll get to you. I'm just going to get her right in the middle. Yes. Do you want to come up and take the mic, or?
Me?
Yep.
Oh, I'll try to speak loudly. This is mostly for Julie, but feel free to jump in. As a college advisor, I visit college campuses. I go to the cafeterias and I look around. I see the African Americans sitting together, the Asians sitting together, and I'm wondering if we're not colorblind in college, how are we going to create a colorblind society coming out? And I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing, you know, if you saw it at Stanford or wherever else you're talking and visiting, or anybody else on the panel.
So the question is, you know, the black kids are sitting together and the Asian kids are sitting together in the cafeteria. What I want to point out to you is that the white kids are also sitting together in the cafeteria.
Yeah. It's all just good,
Right? But we make it the black kids and the Asian kids, why are they sitting together and why can't we all, right? And the presumption that it's okay when white kids sit together, but somehow when the kids of color are doing it, that it's problematic. Kids of color do it to find solidarity with one another, particularly when they're in environments where they are the minority. They sit together at lunch in order to feel safe and seen, be able to not have to answer questions about their eyes or their lips or their nose or their heritage or their brains or what have you. So it's about solidarity and finding community and sustenance to get back out there and interact in the integrated or predominantly white world. You know, I don't have a problem with groups of folks who are alike gathering together. I think we all, birds of a feather, do flock together, but we are enriched when we actively seek out friendships and relationships and connections with people who are different from us. It's true for all of us. So this is what is, I think, beautiful about our Bay Area. You can find places here that are not very diverse. You can choose that. But you can also choose to be in community with people who are different than you. And when you do, you grow and you learn and your heart expands. And if you have children, then their hearts are expanded by the mere fact of where they've grown up, and that leads to a better America.
Do you want to take the mic and ask your question?
Well, yeah, okay, yes. So it seems to me we've been dishonest as a nation. We have this myth of democracy and pursuit of happiness and equality, and I think we kind of hide behind that, but yet we've mistreated the Native Americans, we've had slavery. What do we need to be honest about and to step up to as a nation to really write our history? Is it an apology? Is it financial, economic? What do we need to do, in your opinion?
I read an interesting article, actually I think it was a blog post about, it was after the Kavanaugh hearing, about Brett Kavanaugh's attitude and sense of entitlement, as well as the entitlement that you see from a lot of Trump supporters, especially the white men in the Midwest who voted for Donald Trump. And the premise of the article was that the American dream is a lie. The American dream in Horatio Alger was always BS. You know, that if you worked hard, then you would see the riches and you would be entitled to these things. You know, there are plenty of people who work hard from the day they're born to the day they die, and they don't change their economic status at all. So what's happened, the premise of this article, that was really got me thinking, is that you have particularly white males in this country who grew up believing in this American dream myth, and when it turns out not to be real, it's not that this was a myth, it's because women took my spot, or the foreigners took my spot, or people of color took my spot. So I think that maybe the answer to your question is for us to be honest as a nation about it really doesn't matter how hard it is that you work, you're not guaranteed or entitled to anything. And I think that once that expectation of anybody being entitled to anything is removed from the collective consciousness of those in America, I think that that's really a good place to start.
And I'm just going to interject as another book recommendation. One of my favorite books of the last couple of years, Ta-Nehisi Coates, We Were 8 Years in Power. Yeah. You will devour it, and he just gives so much information on that topic. But I don't want to, Allison, you have a question, or are you telling me we don't have much time?
No, you can
Oh,
go
okay.
as you want as far as I'm concerned. No,
Allison?
I had a comment. Thank you. So first of all, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Paula, for doing this wonderful event. And thank you guys, this is fabulous, and I know everybody's getting so much out of a discussion like this. I have an interesting experience. So as a white woman, Jewish, I do have two different places I'm coming from, but I am white. And so when I had two children, I felt it was really important for them to see what it was like to be in a diverse environment. When we moved to Marin County, it's not very diverse. However, we lived in San Rafael, and we sent our kids to Davidson Middle School, for those of you familiar, and San Rafael High, which was 65 to 70% Latino. Well, I can't tell you how many comments I got from people. I even got comments from people accusing me of being a bad mother for sending my children to this school because from people, white people, okay. Caucasians, in Marin County, saying, you know, don't you care about your kids' education? How can you send them to a school like that? And I would get so angry, and I would find myself just, you know, spitting out anecdotes and defending it, and, you know, it was really difficult for me. And I still find that in Marin, progressive Marin, where we think that we're so liberal and accepting of people, and yet, yeah, it is socioeconomic divide. But just the fact that I was accused of not being a good parent, and I just want to say that I'm very proud of my daughters and how they grew up to have such an important sense of diversity and what the world is about. And I think that a huge part of that, maybe they would have got a better education in a school that had more financial, resources. However, they feel like they got the best education because they played on sports teams and went to class and sat next to kids that were not like them, but they all got along and never once felt scared to go to school. So I just have to
Oh, way in the back. Do you want to come up and mic it, or are you going to shout it? Yep, I can hear you.
So I'm a school teacher here in White Marin County. I have been for 25 years. And it is frightening how white it is. My white students don't know that they're white.
Okay.
They don't know what that means.
Her white students don't know that they're white.
They don't know what it means to be white. They just know the incredibly insulated world they live in. And yes, we have a lot of resources, and yes, the schools are really good, and I love my job. But I think what happened somewhere 30, 40 years ago is the integration that started happening stopped. And our schools are phenomenally segregated.
It's true.
And the only way to, help, unless white parents move to more diverse neighborhoods, white kids are never going to know that there are people who aren't white, except what they see on movies. And that's a disservice.
So, did everybody hear her, or do I need to repeat? Oh, okay. She's saying she's been an educator in the Marin County.
We have a couple kids, a handful, 3 kids from Marin City that come to our school in Larkspur. And, they're kind of lonely. They hang out together like, the 20-year anniversary of White on the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria. And they don't have a cafeteria, but hanging out. But it's not okay to live a segregated society in 2019. It's not okay. And I don't know what to do about it. And I'm a teacher.
Okay, I need to translate to everybody. She's an educator in Marin County School District, and she's basically appalled, or shocked and appalled, by how white the school district is, and that the kids really don't see that they're even white, or that there is color, because that's all they see. In other words, they're in a bubble, a race bubble, so to speak. And you sound frustrated as a teacher, and
and I'm trying to I have posters up. I teach world history and language arts, and this is the 400th anniversary of the first Africans who were brought against their will to this continent. 400 years in August. And nobody's talking about it. And my students are like, why do we have to talk about racism? I'm not talking about racism. It's like people have been in this country for 400 years, and we don't even talk about them.
okay, and she's saying there isn't enough dialogue about race, whether it's positive or negative. There just isn't discussion about it. My question, on top of her frustration, is to a lot of the parents and teachers here. I mean, I'm not from here. I live here now. I'm from Detroit. So I come from like an 80%, black community. And then I lived in New York. So this is new for me. What I don't get is, if you don't have diversity, can't you seek it out? I mean, we do have the Richmond Bridge. Can't you take your kids to functions in the East Bay?
School is a big part of it. I mean, I get what it is you're saying about school and about integration.
But if you don't have it, shouldn't you, as a parent, go out of your way to take the word diversity?
Of course, in an ideal world, yeah, I think so. But just what piqued my interest is what you were saying just about school integration, about how it seemed like it started and then it stopped. And it's, I mean, more than, but here's the issue. Elaine down here just said that's exactly what happened, but it really boils down to economic concerns. That's really what it boils down to. There will always be people of means and people who are not, or without means. What you were talking about made me think about how I was, back 20 years ago, I worked at KTVU, and I remember there was a story we had one morning on about a school in East Oakland. It was an elementary school where they reported this on the news because the boys' bathroom had been locked for 3 years. Had been locked for 3 years because it was in such a state of disrepair, and it was the school district did not have the money that was the excuse, they did not have the money to repair this bathroom so the boys could go. I don't know what the children did for all of this 3 years. All right, so that night I was asked to MC a charity auction for a public school on the peninsula. I'm not going to say which one or where. It was on the peninsula, but it's a public school, okay? And it was to get computers for, it was a middle school. And it was to help get computers for the middle school, okay? And again, this is a public school. So what some of the items I remember were that Neil Young donated an afternoon in his studio with him and lunch. Larry Ellison had donated his private jet. By the time we are done, in 2 hours, $2 million has been raised for this public middle school. You know, but across the bay and the predominantly black school, they can't fix the toilet so little boys can go to the bathroom. So the issue becomes how do we end up in a situation where we have more economic parity? And I don't know what the answer to that is because this is not it's not a socialist movement.
Can I make one more point?
Very quickly, because we have other people who want to.
But we're in Marin County and we keep voting against higher density housing. And if we could let higher density housing that's affordable be here, even though it will change our quality of life, it will enhance our quality of life if we get to recycle
I see a
We
young
want to also
person.
take on Prop 13, there's a movement to take on Prop 13. We got the corporations to pay their fair share, and when we do that, we'll free up more resources for public schools.
Yes.
Young person.
Yes, I think that a lot of what you said really resonated with me because my family is Puerto Rican and I attended a conservative evangelical Christian college this last year. And so that's where I saw that a lot of times white people who have been raised in wealthy communities, they do not look to enter into diverse relationships and diverse communities. And so with that, and I think where that comes from is that they almost, even like the liberal per se, people who think that they are progressive, they fall back on the safety blanket of saying like, oh, I am colorblind. I don't see color. And so with that, it's like their scapegoat to not being racist. And so if you guys could even like speak on what colorblind ideology is and how that works in communities like Marin County, because when we don't address colorblindness, then there can be no diversity or even work towards increasing diversity as people simply don't think it's a problem.
People saying, using the term I'm colorblind as a way to not engage in conversations maybe about race and racism. Some would say it's a cop-out.
Well, even more than that, here's the thing. For those people who will say there's no such thing as white privilege, to say that I don't see color is white privilege. I don't have a choice. I'm serious. I mean, to say that is, in fact, the epitome of white privilege. We don't have a choice, you know, whether if we can't say I don't see color when I'm being followed from aisle to aisle of the store, or when I get stopped because for whatever pretext, you know.
Yeah,
so just that in and of itself.
Excellent point.
Something I've been realizing over the past years is that I think increasingly I care less and less about intentions and more about actions and how they affect other people. And I think I've noticed that in a lot of the thinkers I trust the most, a lot of the writers I trust the most are the ones who are open to correction. And who, when someone does something wrong, says something wrong, they say, "Oh my God!" And they learn that was wrong. They say, "That was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to change. I want to be better." And I feel so simply taking that stance can do so much. And so accepting that people make mistakes, and that I might make mistakes, and that if I say something on Twitter that feels hateful to a group, I hope to God that I'll say, "I'm sorry I said that, everybody," instead of falling back on, "But I meant well, I'm a good person." I think that presumption of innocence, the presumption of goodness, has been causing a lot of harm.
Good point. We may have to get down to the last two questions. I'm going to go in the back and then I'll come back up here. You.
First of all, thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. Can everybody hear me?
You want it?
Barely. That's the person over at the book passage in the Ferry Building, so I will speak loudly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. And I sometimes feel like a lot of us put the onus of explaining the community on our friends who are people of color, which is obviously wrong. I guess my biggest question is if you could think of something, one thing, that white people could do to leverage their privilege in the service of diversity and getting rid of racism as much as possible. What would that be? Is there something, any? I'll sit down. My name is Lorraine.
Can you repeat it?
Oh, so her question was if there's anything that that white people can do to leverage their privilege to help diversity or to help with people of color. I think Reese and I were talking a little bit about inclusion riders. So if you're doing an event, or if you get some kind of opportunity and asking like who else is involved in this team, like who else is going to be on the team, and asking, is it going to be all white people? Is there any diversity? Just bringing that up is a way to point out that that's what we want. We want more diversity. We don't just want the same group of people in positions of power or of influence all the time.
Yeah, I think Hollywood is trying to do that. Some people in Hollywood are trying to get them, like they can actually put it in contracts. I mean, you can see if you're an actor of a certain level or whatever, to say, what is it called?
An inclusion writer.
Inclusion writer. So you're saying, let's bring it right where we are. If you're on volunteering or something, or working someplace, or working on an event, just bring it up and say, this is important to me. If I'm going to be a part of it, can we think of it in terms of bringing in more diversity? Good point.
I think we have a
Can
couple more
Julie
thoughts
talk
here.
about it like from a parent's point of view? I'd like to.
Well, I know Brian wants to say
Or
something.
Brian too, yeah.
I wasn't going to say something from a parent's point of view. I was going to say, we talk about being allies and using your, whatever privilege you have in the moment, whether it's your race or your gender, your age, your position in life, your whatever, to advocate for the person who seems to be being misunderstood or mistreated or so on, to attach yourself to them by saying, I believe in them, I'm listening to them, let's hear more from them, to sort of use your privilege and step aside to make room for that person to be heard. What I wanted to say to every person here who is not black or brown is this. Imagine what it must be like to be a black or brown child in America, to be happy-go-lucky and going about your childhood and everything's great, and then to have it dawn upon you at some point quite young that something might be wrong with you on the basis of your skin color. We're all born, whether you believe in God or the universe, we all arrive here. None of us ask for our skin color or our hair texture or the particular shape of our nose or lips. But at some point, America sends the message to black and brown kids, something's wrong with you because of your skin color. You're a suspect, you're probably a bad actor, you might be a vandal, you might be a criminal, you're probably not very smart, you can't be trusted, you're lazy, etc., whatever the stereotypes are. It dawns upon a child. I'm sort of paraphrasing Patrice Kahn-Cullors in her amazing memoir from the Black Lives Matter movement, When They Call You a Terrorist. So imagine what it must be like to discover you have dark skin. And here I am telling you this as a very light-skinned biracial black woman. I know the privilege I have with the lightness of my skin. When I look at my black brothers and sisters who are dark skinned, I am filled with empathy, often bordering tears, to think about what must it be like to walk through America wearing dark skin. I know what it's like to walk through with light skin, okay? And I have tremendous empathy for darker skinned individuals. So I put that out there to those of you who wear the privilege of light skin in a country that rates people on the basis from lightness to darkness, worth to worthless, to try to ask yourself, what can I do to love black people? What can I do to actively practice loving black and brown people? Because somebody said, justice is love in action. That might have been Brian Stevenson, I'm not sure. But that is what's required, to see dark-skinned people as deserving of dignity and respect and love. That is what is missing in America. There are a lot of things missing in America, but this is what I'm choosing to focus on right now. That, in the context of this conversation, could really help. That is the power of each individual to say, I will treat the black and brown people around me as deserving of the dignity and love and respect that I would like to have for myself.
If we were all able to make that shift, we would begin to make a better America.
Oh, Julie's daughter, right? No?
Yeah.
Is it Bella?
Bella,
Yeah.
sure.
Yes,
Stand
not
up,
my
stand
Julie,
up.
not this Julie.
Yeah.
This is Bella, who
Yeah.
I was quoting earlier.
I just want to start by saying listening to you guys is so inspiring to me, and sorry, just as
You got this.
as a woman of color, it's just really beautiful to hear your stories and how much you've done, and just for myself and for my other friends who are either people of color or women of color, I just would like to know, like, if you have any advice on just like how to carry yourself throughout the world, because I'm still in high school, so college, thinking about college has been kind of scary because I've been so supported by my family and my community at Branson, being Asian American, so I'm just kind of worried about how I will be received wherever I end up next year. So I know that you all have dealt with a lot of adversity in your life and you've overcome it with such strength, and I'm just was wondering if you had any like words of advice of how to keep that strength in the face of adversity, and how to like go through the world like with feeling secure in yourself, and like how to harness that security, and just something along the lines of that.
I would say this, Bella, and that it's something that it took me till I was well into my 30s to really learn and to understand, and that is that what they think about you or what they say about you doesn't matter. Nobody has the right to define you but you. You know who you are, you know what you are. Nobody else has. What other people think of you is none of your business.
First of all, thank you for saying that. That's so moving. And I think one thing that has helped me a great deal, especially maybe in the past 5-10 years, is I have increasingly I don't keep people in my life who don't view me as a full human being worthy of respect and worthy of every bit of humanity. So it's hard for me to, so during the Kavanaugh hearings, for instance, I was just having trouble understanding what people were thinking because I no longer had these people in my life. And I've just gotten more and more efficient about ejecting people from my life. In a way I think I should be treated. And I think one doesn't always have to be nice. And sometimes being nice will cost you much too much. And that's not, and it's not your job to be nice to everybody.
I just wanted to come back to this idea of, like Reese putting eye shadow underneath her eyes. I chose something, I shaved part of my head. It's kind of the same sentiment, but I think that you choose something about yourself to kind of double down on that you're also kind of proud of, or that, and this idea of like visually doubling down on who you are is already going to cut some of those conversations. They're just not gonna come, they're just not gonna arise. Like figuring out what one thing that you're proud of, like what part of your heritage or like your person or the way that you want to move into the world, and then doubling down on it and not letting anyone question it.
Excellent. As much as I'd love for us to continue, and we should continue personally, individually, amongst the community, with this conversation, let's not make it just a once-a-year thing. Let's continue the discussion, but we're going to wrap it up because each of our panelists have wonderful books that we'd love you to support, that can help you continue the discussion. We have them not only at the registers, but we have a couple of display tables with their books and some other titles that were curated by myself and Bill Petrocelli on the topic of race, racism, and immigration and things like that. So please avail yourselves to that, to those books.
We're gonna set a table up in the back.
And yeah, and there's a table up in the back.
Well,
Will they be signing books?
And they will be
at the
signing
table in the
books.
back, it'll take us just a minute, but we'll have them come back here.
Yeah, and they will sign, autograph, and talk to you as much as they can post this event. Thank you so much for supporting us.